All right, so maybe we can get started and perhaps other people will join throughout the session. But we're very excited to be sharing with you during this session information about the Understanding Risk Field Lab and some of the things that we've learned about radical collaboration for climate and disaster risk reduction. So first, thank you for joining this call. We had initially envisioned that this would be a two-day event where we would not only describe this fantastic event, showcase some of the outputs, but also start actually working together to organize the next field lab. We're glad that you nonetheless are able to join us for this virtual event. And we really hope that you treat this really as an invitation for further conversation and collaboration. So I wanted to start by acknowledging my amazing co-conspirators in this work, specifically Robert Soden, who's an assistant professor at the University of Toronto, and I believe recruiting students. So if you're a student out there, you can contact him. Karen Barnes, an engineer at Arup, Breen Hamill, assistant professor at Nanyang Technological University, where I also am. And I guess I should introduce myself, David Lalumont, also an assistant professor at the Earth Observatory of Singapore and NTU in Singapore, where I lead the Disaster Analytics for Society Lab. So a big part of the magic of this event, and certainly I think one of the main benefits that made this a radical collaboration is that the participants played a huge role in organizing the event and shaping the event. So these are just some of the many participant co-organizers of the field lab that I wanted to highlight and thank again. And for those of you who are on this call, hello, thanks for joining us and great to see you again. So what will this session entail? We're going to start up with a video to try to get you into the field lab spirit and into the field lab environment. We are going to do a little bit of crowdsourcing for ideas about the next field lab. Then I'll be describing some of the key characteristics of the field lab that I think made it very successful in forming these radical collaborations. We'll share a few other videos and specifically hear from participants through participant videos. And then Karen will be sharing the toolkit that we've developed, and we'll hopefully still have time for questions that Robert will be monitoring. So please post your questions anytime throughout the presentation in the Zoom chat. So first, let's jump into a video for you all to experience a bit of the UR Field Lab and get a flavor for the dynamics of the environment.
It affects disproportionately the poor and the vulnerable people. The cities themselves are sinking. And then just the process of urbanization, a city that expands, it means flooding is more frequent. More and more days out of the year, various urban services are not functioning because of flooding.
It's a big, complicated topic, so we need to bring many different perspectives, many different kinds of expertise to bear on these questions.
The Southeast Asian Disaster Risk Insurance Facility thought that this experiment was worthwhile. They're one of the main sponsors of this event. That's exactly the type of project that we were excited to work on.
So CDRIF is a regional organization that's looking to share knowledge and expertise about flood risk.
As I am in the field of policymaking also, it has to be discussed in a holistic manner.
The event itself is really unique, testing out new ways of working, new ways of collaborating. It's pretty much the first field lab event, which lasts an entire month.
This format is very different to traditional events.
Traditional academic conferences don't actually allow you to be able to have that collaboration with as many people for as much time.
You know, at the core of financial protection from disasters is a good understanding of risk, of flood impact potential, and our opportunities for responding.
we decided to attend to improve the resilience of local communities in the Philippines.
It seemed like it would fit what I'm trying to do for my doctoral research, which is to study citizen design and post-disaster housing constructions.
We've been flying drones, sending people around with 360-degree cameras. We've tested new methods in machine learning and artificial intelligence. We've built a new kind of sensor.
New academic papers, new data sets, new models.
Decolonizing disaster science.
A warning signal can be sent to the communities downstream telling them, okay, a big flood is going to come in a few hours.
A flood forecasting system.
Prototype development for the Drift online platform.
The flood level is up to here.
They spent a lot of time sort of understanding flood potential from their perspective.
So basically, she told me you would have 4 to 5 people like holding hands or tying a rope and walking together because you can't really see anything. The flood for her house came to here. This is her everyday life.
Events like this are really important because they represent a new way to produce knowledge. A lot of the ways that knowledge is produced right now is very focused on us sitting in our offices and our institutions that are very far away from the field and trying to collaborate or trying to build data sets or trying to find new ways to make our models work that can now often actually, especially in the space of being a disaster scientist, be quite isolated from the reality or be quite isolated from the way that people work.
This event and these kinds of events are really necessary. Confronting climate change and disaster risk is a whole of society effort.
Collaboration across disciplinary boundaries, collaboration across national boundaries.
I mean, I really hope that this will change how people think about floods, about new methods in flood risk modeling or flood data collection, that they bring home friendships and relationships and collaborations that they can carry forward. Without bringing these folks together, we're not going to be able to make meaningful impacts.
Awesome. Oh. All right. Can people hear me again? All right, thank you. Okay, well, that music will definitely like pump me up again. But hope you enjoyed that video. And now we wanted, now that you have a little bit more of an idea about the field lab, we wanted to have you join us in crowdsourcing ideas for the next UR Field Lab. So Perrine will be sharing this link to the Jamboard. Perhaps you've used Jamboards in some of the other sessions that have been going on at the Understanding Risk conference, but it's a very simple post-it board style tool. So we've organized a few boards. You can scroll the different boards on the top there and add post-its to let us know where we should host the next field lab, what it should be about, do you want to participate, how do you want to participate, and it's really important for us to kind of get your ideas and to form kind of new collaborations through this Jamboard. You can also post your questions, by the way, both in the Zoom chat or on the Jamboard as well. So taking a step back, I wanted to answer, why did we organize the field lab? And partly it's really because of the sheer complexity of problems related to climate and disaster risk. So events and events such as conferences, workshops, hackathons aren't necessarily adequate in helping us form the real collaborations that are needed to produce innovations in these fields and address these problems. And likewise, even the innovation grants or the kind of ideas grants that have become very popular and that are certainly very important tend to support ideas and collaborations that already exist rather than kind of supporting the process of forming new collaborations, coming up with innovative ideas. So we really wanted to focus on the exploring radical new forms of events to make, collaborate, and design things rather than just presenting things, which is typically what we do at conferences or workshops. Develop innovations in tech, policy, art, finance, communication, and so forth, and obviously have fun doing so. So some of the key characteristics of the field lab, and these are some of the ones that I wanted to discuss, but I'll jump right in. So the first is that it was a month-long event, And we recognize that's very unusual. We were really curious to experiment with this much longer duration event. And part of the reason why is that true interdisciplinary collaboration takes time. Engineers, artists, technologists, policymakers each have their own culture and ways of understanding the world, ways of thinking, and it just takes time to break down the barriers between these cultures to be able to form effective collaboration. Also, good work takes time. You know, having myself organized many hackathons before, you know, we have to recognize that it's quite presumptuous to think that we can do real significant work in kind of short bursts of time. It just takes time to form the collaborations, to produce ideas, test something out, fail at it, test something else. Learning obviously takes time. And then perhaps one of the things that I hadn't quite anticipated, but to me, this really reinforced the idea that good collaborations are underpinned by real meaningful relationships and friendships. And I think one of the most beautiful things we saw coming out of this event are the amazing friendships that have formed and which have lasted, you know, much longer after this event and are still here. We had a bias towards action, and once again, this was a reflection against the typical events where you tend to present existing work. So we had 3 simple rules. You had to make something, you had to document it, and you had to contribute to the community. So it wasn't enough to just work on your own work or your own project. You also had to contribute to other people's work. And the sheer amount that was produced during this month was really staggering and much beyond anything that we had expected. And that ranged from new risk models, risk maps, serious games for policymakers, gallery quality art pieces, and we did have a month-long gallery session after the event that showcased those pieces. We developed new sensors, new platforms for risk financing, a 3D model of Chiang Mai, and many other things. And there's over 110 documented outputs on the website that you can see, and we have the link at the bottom here. True attention to diversity and inclusion in its broadest sense. And some of the key elements that we designed to encourage this was, first, that the event was completely free. This is, you know, in the context where conferences today are typically at least $1,000, sometimes much more than that, for kind of a 3-4 day event. And we hosted people for an entire month, entirely free, thanks to our sponsors, but it did take quite a bit of work to get those sponsors on board. And in addition to that, we provided sponsorship for people who needed it, and that covered flights, living expenses for a month, accommodation, food, and a stipend, because we really didn't want finances to be a barrier to participation. I think part of the month-long time frame was also to bring flexibility. So most people weren't able to attend, obviously, for an entire month, particularly working professionals, but perhaps there was 1 week within the month that they could attend. So making it a long time frame also gave it more flexibility for more people to participate. Obviously, this was hosted in Chiang Mai, and we engaged a lot with the local community there that experiences flood regularly. So we had translators available. And we did institute a pretty strict code of conduct to make sure that the space and the environment was always safe, inclusive, and positive, and took action in case of issues with that. All right. And partly the forming of radical collaborations wasn't only in kind of targeting diverse participation from a very broad spectrum of experts, and they are real experts, but also we established these themes around which these collaborations could happen, and we communicated that quite early and formed kind of a Zoom workspace for people to start discussions even beforehand. And some of those themes were range from remote and crowd sensing, art science collaborations, machine learning, games, risk financing, nature-based solutions, and more. So these are just kind of some of the examples of the themes that we had organized. And the last thing I wanted to touch on is this open space model. And perhaps some of you have participated in events that had this open space model, but the idea there that all participants are equal and everyone is a speaker. So there isn't this kind of separation between organizers, presenters, and participants. And the participants are both knowers and learners. And one of the key things as well is we were very grateful that people chose to spend a lot of time with us, up to a month of time with us. But that also meant that we wanted to make sure that they could take control over their own schedule. And the way that that would operationalize is using this big board, and you see that image on the right of that board, where kind of at the beginning of the week, anyone could post an idea and to say, okay, I'd like to work on this, and I'll be in this room during these times. Please join me in this discussion. And then people would join in and then set the rest of the schedule for the rest of the week and then the rest of the month. And that worked really, really well. And it's also worthwhile to note that the space was also incredible. So you can see our background here. That's a space that we had, and that was really important to give flexibility for the different activities that you need for good work and collaboration. So there were many different sized rooms, outdoor space, indoor space, a library, a cafe. So that was a very important element to this event. Okay, I've talked quite a bit now, so we're going to jump back to a few videos. Specifically, we wanted to show you one of the projects that was developed through this process. And then you'll get to hear reflections from some of the participants in the event. Also, a quick reminder that you should post your questions either on the Zoom chat or in the Jamboard. And please join the Jamboard and give us your thoughts anyway.
Chiang Mai and Thailand in general experiences a lot of flooding kind of throughout the monsoon season in particular. So definitely one of the ideas for hosting this event here that we could also focus on some of the particular issues of flooding in Chiang Mai.
ถ้าเวลามันขึ้นก็มันส่วนมากมันจะขึ้นต้นที่ว่าอันนี้ก็ยังดีนะที่ว่าเป็นมีกำแพงแต่มันขึ้นที่ต่อระบายน้ำนะที่นะมันจะโยนขึ้นมาไง
So specifically we worked with the Chiang Mai University Oasis Lab, helping to redesign a early warning system. These were ultrasonic sensors, basically sonar, that measure the height of rivers. And if there's an abrupt change in that height, a warning signal can be sent to the communities downstream, telling them, okay, a big flood is going to come in a few hours. Currently, they're having issues of false alarms. So sometimes the sensor might get triggered because there's an obstacle or a bird flies underneath the sensor. And every false alarm makes the community less stressful of the system. So now we built it so that if the water or the sensor at least measures beyond a certain amount, a camera is triggered, takes a picture, which gets uploaded to a server, and we can have a verification of whether or not this is a real flood. And they were very excited about these new tools that can be made available to them to help them do their work and reduce the risk of flooding in their communities.
All right, and now we're going to hear some reflections from some of the participants themselves.
So first, can you tell me about what is your name, where are you from?
My name is Peter Redshaw, and I'm a geologist from a company called Arup based in London.
And what made you want to come to the field lab?
I thought the field lab was just a really interesting idea for a conference, because quite often you go to a normal conference and you can spend a week talking to various people and listening to lots of presentations, but not necessarily coming away with a great deal of information. Whereas the format of this is much more sort of conducive to meeting interesting people, sharing ideas, trying things, failing, and then learning what went wrong and trying again. So I think we've achieved a lot more in this format than you might otherwise.
And what will you be working on?
So I came here looking to working with some of the mapping groups, and I've ended up joining the team doing some more of the sensing type stuff. So we've been working looking at how we can use remote sensing techniques to detect when rivers may be leading to a flood, and ultimately how that can then feed into early warning type systems.
Okay, and what will you bring back home?
I will bring back home lots of new friends and colleagues, which has been really real positive. We've also learned some interesting techniques, machine learning techniques, so packages which we can use in things like R. And I've just come out of a really interesting lunchtime presentation from mapmaker David about how we can make our maps more beautiful. If we put more love into our maps, that shines through in the quality of them. So that I will definitely try and take home back to London.
Thank you.
Welcome to Chiang Mai Field Lab. Please tell us your name and where you came from.
I'm Olivia. I came from Singapore.
And what do you do?
I'm the lead scientist for environment climate at the Institute for the Public Understanding of Risk.
And what made you want to come to the Field Lab?
The opportunity to do some work in the field. It's fantastic to be able to jump right in with a project, and for me a new project involving videography, and find a team willing to work with me and with lots of ideas and interesting experience of their own.
And what will you be working on?
We're working on a video, possibly a short documentary, which tries to capture stories of people's flood experience and to ask them how the flood risks they face fit into the wider context of other environmental risks.
Awesome. And what will you bring back home?
Stories and wonderful new learnings about how to go about making a video and how to work very intensely with a great, passionate bunch of people.
Great. Thanks, Olivia. Bye. Please tell us your name and where you're from.
Hi, my name is Sneha. I'm from Pune in India.
And what do you do?
I'm an architect, and I'm also a urban development socio-spatial researcher.
Awesome.
And I also illustrate. So yeah.
So what will you be working on?
It's a little tricky to answer that because there's so much happening here. But at the moment, we're developing a few projects with a particular group of elderly people over here, like looking at how we can insert into existing projects in the community. So I am particularly interested in working on how risk is communicated through narratives and through also some illustration booklets that I will be working on. And besides that, I'm really looking to increase my technical skills here. So I'm trying to learn GIS I'm going to start learning GIS from the teams here so that I can insert that into my research and mapping once I'm back home.
Great.
Yeah.
Can you tell me what is your name and where you're from?
I'm Sunana Sen. I am from India, but I'm currently based in London.
What made you want to join the Field Lab?
I think a couple of things. The first one was just the interdisciplinary nature of the Field Lab. That was very appealing because we tend to work in silos, so it's nice to work with all of these different sort of experts, and not just experts, but also people who are keen on learning. And sorry, the second reason was also just this open conference aspect of it was very new to me, and that was equal parts intimidating and exciting. So yeah.
What are you doing at the Field Lab?
So I've come with a couple of my colleagues, and we are working on creating an information ecosystem map for Chiang Mai. This is basically how information flows from one point to another, through which channels, and what kind of actions are taken based on this information.
And finally, what do you hope to bring back home?
Oh my gosh, where do we begin? I've been here 2 weeks, so there's so much that I'm taking back with me. Number one thing though is the information ecosystem map that we've created. That is what we came here for, and we have managed to do that to some degree, and we're very happy to take that back to our work. Other than that, just the new things that I have learned here, technical skills or just learning about others' experiences in different parts of the world. That's been exciting, and lots of food and touristy stories that I'm taking back, which is exciting.
Right. Please tell us your name and where you're from.
Well, my name is Mariano Balbi, and I am from Buenos Aires, Argentina.
And what do you do?
I'm a PhD student at University of Buenos Aires, and I'm currently working on probabilistic modeling of urban flood risk.
And what made you want to come to the field lab?
Well, I guess it's a great opportunity to connect with people that is working also on urban floods, but from very different perspectives, like social sciences, and GIS, machine learning.
And what will you be working on here?
So I'm planning to work here on vulnerability modeling, exposure mapping, and also flood forecasting.
Awesome. And lastly, what will you bring back home?
I think I will bring back home a lot of new connections, new people that is working and I can potentially work with in the future. And also another great experience on how people live with floods in a very different setting than back home.
Hi, Pamela. So please tell us your name and where are you from?
I'm Pamela Cahilig. I'm from the Philippines.
Awesome. And what made you want to come to the field lab?
Well, it's the idea of people from different backgrounds, people from STEM fields, but also social scientists such as myself, designers, architects, and also artists, like coming together and looking at the problem of urban flooding from different angles and maybe exchanging perspectives. So I'm really interested in the interdisciplinary aspect of the program.
What will you bring back home?
Definitely, I'm learning so much, not just from the actual like talks and lectures and workshops in our little calendar, but just from informal conversations with people from fields that are really different from mine. I think it's really that knowledge through social connection that I'll take back.
All right, thank you everyone. Hope you enjoyed the videos. I think it's really, really great to hear from some of the participants there and their thoughts on their experiences there. Quick reminder to join the Jamboard, particularly if you arrive late, and contribute your thoughts to the Jamboards to help us organize Understanding Risk Field Lab 2022. Now with that, I wanted to pass it on to my colleague Karen, who will tell you about the Field Lab toolkit that she has worked on. So I'm going to stop sharing screen and let her take over.
Great. Thank you, David. So hopefully you can see my screen now. So yeah, I guess it's a little bit difficult to kind of gauge the reaction to those videos on a Zoom call, but I know I really enjoyed rewatching some of those videos and reliving some of the moments from the event last year, and I certainly can't wait for the next one. So as David said, if you haven't already, jump on the Jamboard and have your say about what that should look like. So speaking of planning the next field lab, today we're really excited to launch a new publication, the Field Lab Toolkit. The document is live online, and Pareen will put a link to that in the chat. So after the success of the first field lab, we, the organizers, and the Disaster Risk Financing and Insurance Program, our main sponsors, were keen to see more events like this being organized. So we created this toolkit as a resource to help support others who'd like to replicate the event format. It was also a really great opportunity for us to reflect on some of the things that worked really well and some of the things that we might do differently next time around, and to capture those lessons. So today I'm just going to share the document with you, take you through it pretty quickly, and give you a sense of what it contains. So starting off, the document contains a bit of background information, a lot of the stuff that David covered earlier today. So things like, what is a field lab? What is open space? What does it mean to get out into the field? And some summary information of last year's field lab. Also includes things like, what are the goals of a field lab and what are the different elements of a field lab? Then we get into more of the kind of practical guidance around what are the things you actually have to do to be able to organize an event like this. So starting out with event design, thinking through, how do you decide on what the field of your event should be? How do you decide on the goals of the field lab? How big should it be and how long should it be? This one went for a month, but what would it look like if the event went for 2 months or 2 weeks? And then also peppered throughout the document, we have specific examples from last year's event to kind of give that one data point as a helpful reference. So then we provide some guidance around outreach, because you can't have a field lab without participants. So we have some pointers on how to publicize the event, how to recruit participants, and what you might think about if you've got too many applicants and not enough spaces at the event. Then we get to some of the program details and logistics, so things to think about when you're looking for a venue. As David mentioned, our venue in Chiang Mai was really fantastic, and it really helped to set the kind of vibe and give us energy throughout the month-long event. And then one of the key things I think is, planning a closing celebration. I think this was one of my favorite parts of the field lab. We, as David mentioned, we had a month-long exhibition where participants were able to share the work that they'd produced throughout the event. And on the last night of the field lab, we had an opening ceremony where everyone was able to kind of celebrate what they'd achieved and kind of spend some time with their new friends before everybody kind of left and went back to their respective parts of the world. So that was all of kind of the stuff that you should think about before the field lab. Then we provide some guidance on things to think about when you're actually running it. So as David mentioned, there are things that helped facilitate the open space nature of the event. And so particularly looking at the board, just want to point out we have a number of beautiful illustrations that were produced by Sneha, one of the participants who you saw in the video just before. And so this is one example of an ongoing collaboration that started, I guess, back last year. So then we have finally some guidance on encouraging self-organization, because this concept of open space is something that perhaps not a lot of people may be familiar with. And so it just can, I think it can take a bit of time for people to get into the groove of that. So just being aware of it upfront, I think, can be really helpful. And then once the field lab is over, you kind of don't want everything to end there. We really want to have the relationships, the collaborations, the projects to continue on after the event finishes. So we provide some guidance around that. Then we've provided a little snapshot of some of the specific outputs. So the full range of outputs are documented on the website. But these are just, some pieces for inspiration and maybe to give you a sense of some of the types of outputs that might be possible. And then finally, we provide some templates, some really practical tools that can be used if you're looking to set up your own event. And these are all downloadable at the website as well. So that is it in terms of the toolkit. So we did design this with a field lab in mind, but we do think some of the concepts and some of the guidance are relevant for other types of events, so workshops or things like that. So if there's anything that you thought was interesting or useful, you want to find out more, I would encourage you to check out this document. And before I finish up, I just want to say a quick thank you to our sponsors, because without them, this event would not have been possible. In particular, we'd like to thank our main sponsor, the Disaster Risk Financing and Insurance Program at the World Bank. So with that, I will hand it over to Robert.
Okay, thanks, Karen. So we have actually almost 15, 20 minutes left here for Q&A. And so I see there's actually quite a few questions in the Jamboard. You can either post some more there or just drop them directly in the chat. And as you're kind of doing that, as you're thinking about some of your questions, I just want to make a couple of quick announcements while we do this transition. Let's see. So first off, you can see the link here. This slide was not approved by the UR design team, but we are looking for collaborators, partners, local organizations to work with, and just interested folks that want to get involved in planning the next field lab, which will be in 2022. And so if you're here, if you're interested, if you have ideas, questions, just want to follow up, there's a short form you can fill out at that link, and we'll drop that in the chat as well. And then second, Echo Risk Labs, a lot of the work that we do, as you can see, is about how do we think differently about disaster data, bring different perspectives on how we sort of understand and respond to these phenomena. So we have a small grants program that we're just launching now, up to $2,500 for early career academics, graduate students, researchers outside of traditional research institutions that are working on these issues that could use a little bit of support. So we're going to offer, I think, up to six awards. You can find more information about that program and how to apply at that link, which we will also drop into the chat. And the deadline for submissions is December 9th, if I remember correctly. So again, we'll drop that link in the chat momentarily. And with those couple of announcements, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and turn over to Q&A. And so just turning to the Jamboard here, there's a couple of questions, it looks like, for our panel about participants. How did we recruit for participants? Who were the kinds of people that came? What were their motivations for showing up? Could David, Karen, or Karine, would you want to take that one?
I can start us off. How did we recruit participants? So a lot of it, I think, was kind of through our own networks, through the Understanding Risk community. We reached out to a number of kind of mailing lists and things that we subscribed to ourselves, and tried to just get the word out there that way. We were really trying to, I think, diversify the group of participants. So we did make an effort to kind of branch out from just the normal kind of circles that we exist in. So particularly around recruiting artists, we made a specific effort, I think, to reach out to people that might have been outside of our normal networks. So yeah, I think they were the main ones. I don't know if David or Karine want to add to that.
Yeah, I think that's right. I'll just add that this is a section in the toolkit where we share a bit of reflection on this, and really a useful point in the design of the event, where you want to think about what is the message you want to send, and what is the goal of the event, who should be invited, how do you select participants if there is a cap on the number of participants. So it's a good point to sit down with the rest of the design team and share your views and values around these questions.
And we did have a selection process, and I think some of the things that we were trying to get out of that, and we had kind of questions that we were asking, is things like willingness to commit, right? That we didn't want people to just kind of show up. And I mean, it's a great place to be, frankly, but we didn't want people to just be there to experience Chiang Mai. We wanted them to contribute, so we asked about what they would contribute, what they would take home, and I think that was an important criteria for us, that people were committed to this idea, which, you know, the first time this is done was an experiment, and I think it worked very well, but we at least wanted people to believe that this would work.
Great. There's another sort of cluster of questions here about some of the long-term collaborations that were formed, some of the activities that happened after the event. I wonder, yeah, we talked a little bit about this during David's presentation, but I think it'd be interesting to hear a little bit more about, yeah, some of these collaborations, what happened as a result of the event. Breen, did you want to kick this one off?
Sure, I can share a little bit about the process. Before the field lab, we had engaged with Chiang Mai University, a few colleagues, same thing, working through our networks. And I think this was an important part of making sure that we asked the right questions, we better understood the context when we arrived in Chiang Mai, for those of us who were less familiar with the city and key stakeholders in the city. So just to highlight that there's work before the field lab as well. And then the point about time that David made in his presentation is a very important one, where a lot of us have worked on collaborations where you realize that it's with time spent with people and kind of working on issues and successes that you develop these relationships that can make the work more meaningful. So it's kind of what we are compressing in the format of the field lab. And I was very excited myself to get to work with a colleague from the World Wildlife Fund that I met for the first time over there. We had been in touch a bit before, but through working together in Chiang Mai, we were able to develop new projects, and he was actually a speaker, a panelist on the UR 2020 session yesterday. So just as an example of long-term collaborations that were started in Chiang Mai in 2019.
Any other stories of longer-term collaborations?
Sure, I'm happy to add a few more to that. I mean, one of the things that actually, Robert, you should talk about some of the work that you've been doing on the ethics of AI and the proper use of AI in risk reduction. That's all I'll say, and I'll let Robert continue that. But another project, and I see that Gizem is here as a participant. She had started to develop an urban growth model of Chiang Mai and has been working with one of the local professors in Chiang Mai, Professor Sampon, since then, to continue that model for urban growth, to then try to understand how flood risk is changing in time. And that's work that she's still pursuing. One of the art pieces and one of the collaborations that formed around art has grown since Chiang Mai and led to another exhibit in Korea on flooding and living with water. So that was very exciting. So these are just kind of off the top of my head, some of the things that I know have happened. And I think perhaps one of the difficulties has been in tracking some of those. And I think that's related to some of the questions. But I want to go back to Robert to share some of his experiences of work that started in Chiang Mai.
Sure, yeah, the responsible AI for disaster risk management. We actually had a session yesterday on this topic and have a forthcoming report that the World Bank is sponsoring. That really actually started as a little bit of an argument between some anthropologists and designers and some hydrologists and flood management experts at the field lab about what are some of the potential negative impacts of introducing AI and in particular machine learning into some of these flood data processes. And it was fascinating to watch that sort of grow from, a little bit of an argument to a big project and a session at UR 2020, and now something that I think many of us in the Understanding Risk community are thinking about it and working on. And I don't think that would have happened had we not been able to bring so many different types of expertise together for an extended period of time, the way we did in the field lab. There's a couple of questions here about Chiang Mai and about some of the local organizations. How did they participate in the field lab? What did they contribute? What are the long-term impacts of the field lab for Chiang Mai, if any?
I mean, I have ideas for that, but I've talked a lot, so but okay, one example that I thought was really exciting. One of the organizations that we work with is called FOPDEV, which is the Foundation for Older People's Development. So this is organizations that works with elderly people on many different topics, and they had been working particularly with rural communities around issues of flash flooding and perhaps the acute vulnerability of elderly people when these floods happen. And they had never worked in an urban context, even if they're based in Chiang Mai. So we worked with them and kind of communities of older folks in Chiang Mai to try to think through kind of some of their experiences of flooding, and also some of the amazing capacity they have and all the stories that they know of flooding, which dates back longer than any kind of documented record of floods. So that was really interesting. And for them, this was a really great experience. And this organization really led that collaboration, but this was their first time looking at these issues in an urban context. And we focused on one neighborhood together. And they've since then done the same process in, I think, 14 different communities in Chiang Mai. So that's, I think, was one of the exciting kind of local collaborations.
Yep. Perhaps just as another example, the Oasis Lab from Chiang Mai University, who works on local sensors and hydrologic modeling, early warning systems. This was also one of the highlights for me to just learn a lot about the great work they were doing, and again, kind of compressing this time that you might need to spend on calls and like one thing at a time. It's really hard to develop meaningful relationships over there, like to see Prof. Pascorn and his team just looking at a lot of the issues that we were interested in, teaching us how to develop these low-cost sensors was extremely rewarding, and I feel like a lot of the participants got a chance to experience this idea of learning by doing, and then understanding what this could bring to your research, to your practice, or simply to your perception of flooding and the work we're doing together.
Thanks. We have a question in the chat from our friend Ranku, who we've worked with on other projects, and he's wondering, this sounds a little bit like a hackathon, and I wonder if we could just sort of talk a little bit more about sort of why this is different, what parts are similar, what, you know, where we sort of took the model and changed it. Karen, do you have thoughts on that?
So actually, I have never been a participant in a hackathon, so I'm probably not the right person to take this question. So I will defer to any of you.
David, how is a field lab different from a hackathon?
Right. Well, I think a couple of key things. I think the hackathons that I've participated in and organized tend to be focused on a compressed timeline. And in fact, that's often part of the design, that, you know, you put a bunch of people in a room, you lock them up for a weekend, give them food, give them a problem, and if you frame the problem correctly, then they can produce a lot of knowledge and or something to tackle that issue. And I think, you know, we've learned a lot from that process, and here we're trying to do something fundamentally different. just to give people much more time to think before they start producing and to really get to know each other. Another thing I think of hackathons is they actually tend to focus on micro communities, actually. I don't think they've been successful in bringing communities together. Oftentimes it's, okay, well, we want to develop an app. So you bring a bunch of smart developers and they develop an app. And it's specifically not necessarily conducive to forming interdisciplinary collaborations, which is understandable because in such a short time frame, like I said, breaking the cultural barriers between disciplines is not easy. So I think in those ways it was quite different. Perhaps Robert as well has some thoughts on this since you've participated in a lot of these.
Yeah, no, I think you covered that well, and I think the toolkit that Karen talked about also sort of helps make some of these distinctions. We're running low on time, so I just want to see if we can get through a couple more here. First one that I can take, any work related to disaster risk financing. Yes, there's quite a bit that happened. Again, good disaster risk financing and insurance programs begin with a solid understanding of risk. So in some ways, all of the work on collecting data and experimenting with sort of novel approaches to risk modeling can support risk financing for sure. But more specifically, we did have a whole study group that was looking at disaster risk financing options situation both in Chiang Mai and in Thailand more broadly. We did a whole user-centered design process around the Seadrift platform, which is a regional risk insurance program. So yes, there's quite a bit around risk financing, and I encourage you to check out the UR Field Lab website for more information on everything that happened in the Field Lab. And we've got just about a minute left, and so we have this one question that I would like to hear from all the panelists on, and that's what is one thing you would change for the next Field Lab, either how you would design it, your own participation in it, how you would organize it. And Pareen, let's kick it off with you.
Mm-hmm. Great question. Because you put me on the spot, I'm going to share have one thought, which would be to even better embrace the spirit of the Field Lab. So my experience was that I was kind of helping navigate the nature-based solution theme and helping to facilitate, and this meant that I had less brain space for other subgroups. So I guess finding ways for myself and for participants in general to really feel like they're free to explore, which is one of the main goals. And I think there are ways to design the event to make sure this is happening for all of us. So I think that's what I would work on for the next event.
We have just a couple of seconds, Karen, 30 seconds on what you would do differently next time around.
Yeah, it is a really good question. I think for me personally, more so about like my own experience, kind of similar to Pareen. I think I probably took a little bit of time to get into the swing of things and maybe would have, I don't know, I want to say like dived in sooner, but I think there was just so much interesting stuff happening that I probably, had a bit of FOMO, and my attention was split, and so maybe spend a little bit of time in the beginning spreading myself too thin, and maybe going back would have tried to commit to a couple of things in a little bit more depth.
Here, I'll just jump in and just say, I think one thing that I would do differently is to think more about the before the event and the after the event. I think we spent a lot of time designing the month itself, which was a tremendous amount of work. But I think we could have done more in supporting the formation of virtual communities, maybe before the event, and thinking more about what happens after. Even some things like setting up like a funding scheme so that people could continue working together, or helping pair them up with funders, or even like monitoring what happens afterwards, I think kind of took us a bit by surprise. And in the next time we do this, I think we'll think much more about those things.
Great, I would agree with all of that. Okay, so we're out of time, we're actually over time. So thank you all so much for coming to this session. We really appreciate it. Please, keep adding your ideas to the Jamboard. have a look at the toolkit. If you do want to get involved in helping us plan the next Understanding Risk Field Lab, which will be in 2022, do fill out that form and we will follow up with you all. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.